The morning Callum Prescott's entire life cracked open started the way most of his mornings did, with cold light, cold marble, and the particular silence of a penthouse that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a year. He stood at the windows of his 42nd floor apartment in downtown Chicago, watching the city wake up below him, and felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction, not gratitude, just the low, hollow hum that had become so familiar over the past 5 years that he'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic. At 43, Callum had everything his younger self had wanted, the kind of money that never needed to be counted, a name that opened rooms, a company, Prescott Capital Ventures, that his father had started in a one-bedroom office in Naperville, and that Callum had turned into one of the most respected private equity firms in the Midwest. He had a penthouse, he had a driver, he had a woman who loved him in the organized, low-maintenance way of someone who understood that love was a category of relationship management. Her name was Diane Forsyth. She came from old Michigan money and newer Chicago connections. She was finishing her coffee at his kitchen island right now, dressed perfectly for the Saturday ahead, her dark hair pulled back with a clip that probably cost $400 and looked like it cost nothing. She was kind, in a surface way. She was appropriate, in every way that mattered to the people who watched Callum's life from the outside. They'd been engaged for 8 months. The announcement had run in the Tribune and the Sun-Times on the same day. His mother had cried happy tears, and then immediately started talking about venue capacity. "You're quiet this morning," Diane said without looking up from her phone. "Just thinking about the alderman meeting Tuesday." She scrolled something. "We're doing the cake tasting at Roseland's at 2. Try not to schedule anything over it." "I won't." He meant it, and he also knew, standing at that window with the morning light doing nothing for his mood, that the word won't and the word can't had begun to feel the same. They were going to Millennium Park. Diane had read something about the new sculpture installation being photographed for some magazine she liked, and she'd thought it would be good to be seen there. That was the word she'd used. Seen. Callum had agreed without processing the distinction between being seen and actually being somewhere. The park was busy for a Saturday in October. The air had that clean, slightly brutal quality that Chicago air got in fall, when the lakefront wind decided to stop pretending to be gentle. Diane walked with one hand in her coat pocket and the other looped loosely through his arm, talking about something to do with their mutual friend's house in Aspen. Callum was listening at exactly the level required to nod in the right places. Then he stopped walking. Not gradually, not because something eased him to a halt. He just stopped, the way you stop when your body registers something before your brain catches up. About 60 feet ahead, near the playground that spilled off the south path, a woman was crouching beside a small girl who'd tripped on the edge of the asphalt. The woman had copper-brown hair that the wind kept stealing across her face, and she was checking the girl's knee with the focused calm of someone who'd done this many times before. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't performing comfort for anyone watching. She was just there, fully, in the way that certain people are when they don't know they're being observed. Callum's chest did something it hadn't done in 5 years. It recognized her. "Callum?" Diane tugged lightly at his arm. "1 second." The woman stood up, kissed the top of the little girl's head, and turned, and that was when the copper hair swung clear of her face, and Callum saw her profile, and the hollow in his chest was suddenly not hollow at all. It was full of something so sharp it nearly dropped him. Fiona Walsh. Or she'd been Fiona Walsh. She might have a different name now. He didn't know. That was one of the things he didn't know, one of the things he'd trained himself to stop wondering about, because wondering led nowhere good. But she was here, in this park, on this Saturday morning, and the little girl she'd just kissed on the top of her head was still holding her hand and pointing at something across the playground. And Callum followed that direction and saw, standing near the climbing structure, very serious, very focused, a small boy who had dark hair and a way of standing with his feet apart and his arms crossed that Callum recognized, deeply and without any doubt at all, because he'd seen that exact posture in photographs of himself at age 6. "Callum," Diane's voice was sharper now. "What's wrong? You look like you're going to be sick." He was going to be sick. or he was going to cry. He hadn't cried since the day his father died, and before that, he wasn't sure he'd cried since childhood, but standing in Millennium Park on a Saturday morning, looking at a boy he'd never seen before, who stood exactly the way he stood, something cracked straight through him. "I need a minute," he said. "I'm sorry." "Go ahead, I'll catch up." Diane gave him a long, measuring look. She was a woman who understood power and leverage and the meaning of pauses. And then she walked ahead, and Callum stood rooted to the path like the wind had turned him to stone. Fiona had noticed him. He saw the moment it happened. Her body went very still, the way bodies go still before they decide whether to run. Then she looked away, immediately and deliberately, and said something to the little girl, and reached for the boy, and the three of them began moving toward the other side of the playground, with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to look like they were leaving. Callum did the math he'd been doing since the second he saw the boy's posture. He and Fiona had been together for 2.5 years before the end. The end had been 4.5 years ago. The children looked 4, maybe 4.5, old enough to have been hers already at the end, old enough to have been conceived right before it. He started walking. He didn't think about Diane. He didn't think about what he looked like or what this meant or what he was going to say. He just walked toward the place where Fiona Walsh had been and felt everything he'd spent 4 years constructing very carefully begin to come apart at the seams. She saw him coming. She gathered the children and moved faster, and then she stopped. Because there was nowhere to go that wasn't past him, and Fiona Walsh, whatever else she was, had never been the kind of person who ran from things she couldn't outpace. She turned and she looked at him, and her face did something he couldn't read, which had always been one of the things that made her extraordinary, that she could contain entire weather systems in her expression and show you only clouds. "Callum," she said. "Fiona." His voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. Hi. Enormously inadequate, both of them, for people who had once known every imperfect thing about each other. The little girl was staring at him. The boy, the serious, dark-haired boy, was watching him with gray eyes that were the exact color of Callum's own. Callum crouched down to the boy's level the way he'd seen parents do and didn't remember learning. "Hey, what's your name?" The boy looked at his mother first, a quick, checking glance. Fiona gave the smallest nod. "Shepherd," the boy said. "Careful." "Proud of the name. That's a good name." Callum's throat felt like something was sitting on it. "I'm Callum? I know," Shepherd said. "Mama has a picture of you in a box in her closet." Fiona closed her eyes for 1/2 second. The little girl, rosy-cheeked, unintimidated by anything, grabbed Callum's sleeve. "I'm Blythe," she announced. "I scraped my knee, but I didn't cry very much." "That's very brave." "I know." She examined him with enormous seriousness. "You look like Shepherd, around the eyes." Callum couldn't speak for a moment. He looked up at Fiona, who was watching him with an expression that had finally broken open. Not all the way, but enough to see something that might have been grief, or might have been relief, or might have been the complicated combination of both that happens when you've been carrying something alone for a very long time. "Fiona," he started, "not here." Her voice was quiet. Firm. "They have gymnastics in an hour." "Not here, not today." "When?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at her children. Her children, his children, a concept so enormous he couldn't hold it in any normal way, and she said, "Tomorrow morning. Compass Coffee on Wrightwood. 8 o'clock. The kids'll be at my neighbor's. I'll be there." She nodded. She took Blythe's hand and Shepherd's hand, and she walked away and didn't look back. And Callum stood in the middle of Millennium Park and felt the entirety of his constructed life begin, quietly and irrevocably, to collapse. Diane was waiting near the sculpture installation with her arms folded and her sunglasses down. She took one look up at his face. "Who was that?" "Someone I used to know." The lie was so inadequate it barely deserved the word. Diane looked at him for a long moment with the particular intelligence she brought to everything. Then she said, "Callum, what's going on?" He didn't have an answer. Not one that would fit inside their relationship or their engagement or the life they'd been carefully assembling. He looked at her, this good, appropriate, measured woman who deserved better than a man who was standing in a park discovering he was someone's father, and said, "I need to tell you something." but I need a day first, to understand it myself." The look she gave him then was one he'd remember later as the moment she knew, before he said anything, that the architecture of their future had already shifted. He didn't sleep. He sat in his home office going through every piece of information that existed publicly about Fiona Walsh, the same way a man might sift through wreckage after an earthquake looking for things that remained intact. There wasn't much. She'd always been private. There were a few references to a landscape design firm, FW Studio, operating out of Lincoln Park, apparently well regarded. A feature in a design magazine from 2 years ago that mentioned her award-winning work on a community garden project. He stared at her picture in that magazine for a long time. She looked good. She looked tired in the way people look when they're working hard at something that matters to them. She looked like herself, which was its own kind of pain. He found a birth announcement, filed publicly. Shepherd James Walsh and Blythe Rowe Walsh, born April 3rd, 4 years and 6 months ago. Father, not listed. Father, not listed. He read those 3 words 11 times and felt them differently each time. The math was unforgiving. April would have been 7 months after the last time he'd been with Fiona, which put the conception right at the exact moment he'd chosen his family's pressure over her, his mother's horror over the woman who loved him, his fear of losing everything his father had built over the person who made him feel most like himself. He remembered the night she'd left, not the dramatic version, not a scene. Fiona didn't do scenes. She'd simply come to his apartment with that particular stillness about her and said, "I can't keep being the thing you apologize for, Callum." And he'd tried to explain that it wasn't her. It was the business relationships, the expectations, the timing, and she'd listened to every word, and then she'd said, "I know." And she'd left. He'd called twice in the following month. She hadn't answered. He'd told himself it was for the best. He'd started seeing Diane 4 months later. He'd built a wall around that chapter and painted it with productivity, and while he was doing all of that, Fiona Walsh was carrying his twins alone and deciding, for reasons he needed to understand before he could grieve them, not to tell him. Compass Coffee was a narrow place on Wrightwood with exposed brick and mismatched chairs, and the smell of something baking in the back. Callum arrived 12 minutes early and sat with his hands wrapped around a coffee he wasn't drinking, watching the door. Fiona walked in at exactly 8. She looked like she'd also not slept much. She ordered at the counter before coming to sit across from him, which he recognized as her way of needing a moment that was hers alone, a beat of normalcy before the impossible conversation. She sat down. They looked at each other across a small wooden table covered in coffee ring stains. 2 people who'd once known each other's middle-of-the-night thoughts, and now didn't know where to start. "They're mine," Callum said. Not a question. He needed her to hear that he already knew, that he wasn't asking her to convince him. Fiona wrapped her hands around her cup. "Yes, why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, just taking the question seriously in the way she always took serious questions. "Because of what you said the last time I tried to tell you something that mattered," she said finally. "Do you remember what happened 2 weeks before I left? The dinner at your mother's house?" He remembered, imperfectly, which was part of the problem. There had been a dinner, his mother's friends, a table full of people whose opinions had always functioned like laws in his world. Fiona had been quiet all evening. Afterward, in his car, she'd tried to say something and he'd been so exhausted from managing everyone's performance of approval that he'd said. He could hear himself saying it. "I can't do this right now, Fee. I need tonight to just be okay." She'd stopped talking. She'd looked out the window the rest of the drive. He'd thought she was being sensitive. He'd thought they'd talk about it later. Later hadn't come before she'd left. "My mother's friend told me that night that I had no business sitting at that table," Fiona said. Her voice was steady in the way of something that had been processed many times and was no longer raw, just true. "That I was very charming for someone who worked with her hands for a living. She said she hoped I wasn't getting any ideas about becoming permanent." She said all of this very quietly, while smiling, the way people like her do, so no one around us could hear but me. She paused. "When I tried to tell you, you said you needed tonight to be okay." Callum set his coffee down. "Fiona, I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because you asked me why. She looked at him directly. When I found out I was pregnant, 2 weeks after I walked out of your apartment, I sat with it for 3 months. I kept trying to imagine calling you. I kept playing it out. You picking up, me saying the words, you having to choose between me and everything else again. And I thought about the dinner, about what you'd said. And I decided I couldn't do it. I couldn't hand my children a father who might choose his mother's approval over them the same way he'd chosen it over me. The words landed in Callum's chest like stones dropped into still water. That wasn't fair, he said. And then, before she could respond, not to me. I should have been given the chance to prove you wrong. But also, it wasn't fair to you either. To carry that alone. He stopped. I'm not Fiona. I'm not here to blame you. I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to tell you that I'm sorry. For the dinner. For saying what I said. For choosing the easy thing when the easy thing was the wrong thing. His voice broke on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. I've been sorry for 4 years. I just didn't know how much. Fiona looked at him for a long time. The coffee shop moved around them, the machine hissing, someone laughing near the door, a child at the next table enthusiastically explaining something about trains. Shepard asks about fathers sometimes, she said quietly, not with anger. He's not an angry kid. He just asks, in that way he has, like he's collecting information. He wanted to know if his dad knew he existed. She paused. I told him I wasn't sure, which wasn't a lie. Callum felt something break loose in his chest. What did he say? Fiona's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. He said, well, if he doesn't know, maybe someone should tell him. He's 4.5, and he's already more pragmatic than most adults I know. Callum laughed. It came out ragged, almost surprised, and then his eyes were embarrassingly wet and he looked at the ceiling for a moment and composed himself. I want to know them, he said. I'm not asking for anything you're not comfortable with. I know I don't have the right to walk in and demand anything. But I want to be in their lives if you'll let me. I want to know who they are. He looked back at her. And I want to figure out how to be someone they can count on. Which I know I haven't proven I can do. Fiona studied him the way she always had, with the particular attention of someone who collected true things about people and trusted only what she found herself. Diane Forsyth, she said, not accusatory, just putting the name in the room. We're engaged, he said. And then, because honesty was the only currency that had any value at this particular table. I don't know what happens with that now. I'm not going to pretend I have a clean answer. But whatever I figure out, Fiona, it won't come at the expense of Shepard and Blythe. That's not a condition. That's just a fact. She was quiet for a long time. A couple near the window stood up to leave, bundling into coats, and the morning light shifted slightly and landed on Fiona's face, and she looked exactly the same as she had the first afternoon he'd met her, at his friend's backyard in Wicker Park, when she'd been arguing about something passionately and gesturing with a glass of lemonade, and he'd thought, without planning to, I want to know everything she thinks. Come meet them, she said finally. Saturday, somewhere low-key. We'll keep it simple and see how it goes. She met his eyes. But Callum, if you're going to be in their lives, you're in their lives. You don't get to be there when it's convenient. Shepard already knows what it feels like to wait for someone who doesn't show up. I won't let it happen again. It won't, he said. I promise you it won't. She nodded, picked up her coffee, looked out the window at the street. He's been drawing pictures of a dad figure since he was 2, she said almost to herself. Always the same, tall, dark hair, sort of serious looking. She paused. He draws pretty well for his age. Callum didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and made a promise to himself, in that mismatched chair at that coffee-ringed table, that the man in Shepard's drawings was going to be someone worth drawing. Diane was at his apartment when he got back. She'd kept her own key, and she was sitting in his living room with a glass of sparkling water, and the expression of a woman who had decided not to play games about what was happening. Tell me, she said. He told her. He sat across from her and told her everything. The park, the recognition, the boy with his posture, the conversation at Cup of Coffee, the math that added up to 4.5 years of children he hadn't known about. He told it plainly, the way he'd learned to do with board presentations, because dressing it in softness would have been disrespectful to both of them. Diane listened without interrupting. When he finished, the apartment was very quiet. "So you have children," she said finally. "Yes. You had them before we started. They existed before we were ever together. Yes." She turned her glass slowly in both hands. "And you want to be in their lives." "I'm going to be in their lives. That's not negotiable. I need you to understand that it's not something I'm deciding. It's something I'm acknowledging." She looked at him for a long time with the calculating intelligence she brought to everything. He'd always respected it. He respected it now when it was pointed at him. "And Fiona," she said quietly. "What about her?" He could have said the appropriate thing. He could have said, "She's just the mother of my children," and kept the territory clean. But he was done saying the appropriate thing. "I don't know yet," he said. "I know that sounds worse than nothing, but you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort." Diane set down her glass with a small, definitive sound. She looked at her engagement ring, the one he'd had made by a jeweler in the West Loop, the one she'd photographed for her Instagram the day he'd given it to her, and she looked at it for a long time. "I've known for months," she said finally, "that you were somewhere else. I told myself it was work stress, merger season, whatever, but the truth is you were." She paused, precise as always, present in the room and absent everywhere that mattered. "And I told myself that would change after the wedding." She removed the ring with 2 fingers and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I was going to marry a man who loved someone else and tell myself that was practical, because we were compatible and our families liked each other, and I'm good at making workable arrangements." She stood up. "I'm too old for workable arrangements." Callum stood as well. "Diane, don't apologize. I mean it. If you apologize right now, I'll be very annoyed." She picked up her coat from the chair. "Those children need their father. That matters more than my embarrassment." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Callum, I hope you figure out how to deserve her." She walked away from you rather than stay in a situation where she felt like an afterthought. That takes a kind of courage you don't find very often. After she left, Callum stood in his apartment for a long time, looking at the ring on the coffee table. Then he picked it up and put it in a drawer, and called his mother. Eleanor Prescott was a woman who had never in her 71 years met a situation she couldn't organize. She arrived at Callum's apartment 40 minutes after he called, looking like she was prepared for a board meeting, and she sat in the same chair Diane had just vacated and folded her hands and said, "Tell me what you've done." He told her. The silence that followed was unlike any silence he'd heard from his mother, who always had something to say. She looked at her own hands. She looked at the window. She looked at him. "You have children," she said. "Yes, a boy and a girl. They're 4.5, and Fiona." Something moved across her face. "Fiona Walsh. Mom, I know what I did." Her voice was quieter than he expected. Not soft, his mother was never soft, but diminished, somehow. Like something had gone out of her that she hadn't intended to release. "I know exactly what I did at that dinner, and I knew what I was doing when I did it. I thought I was protecting your future." She paused. "I was protecting my idea of your future, which is different." Callum looked at her. "Patricia Munro told her she had no business sitting at our table." His mother's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask Patricia to say that. You didn't stop it either." Another silence. Longer this time. "No," Eleanor said. "I didn't." She straightened. Then, unexpectedly, "I would like to meet them, my grandchildren. I'm not asking for anything. I understand I have no claim to any softness from that family, but I'm asking if it's possible, at some point." She looked at him directly. "I'm 71, Callum. I've spent a long time curating the right life for the people around me. I think I would like to spend whatever time is left actually knowing the people in it." It was, he thought, the most honest thing she'd said to him in years. "I'll ask Fiona," he said. "That's all I can promise." She nodded. She picked up her bag. And then, at the door, she paused the way people do when there's a sentence that's been looking for its exit. "She was good for you," Eleanor said. "Fiona, she made you laugh at things that weren't jokes. I noticed that." She paused. "I should have been glad of it." Then she left, and Callum was alone in his apartment, which for the first time in years felt less like a monument and more like a waiting room. Saturday was gray and cold in that specific Chicago way that felt like the city was testing you. Callum rang the bell of Fiona's apartment on Southport at 9:15 with 2 cups of hot chocolate carrier and the kind of terrified calm that he associated with the opening minutes of the most important negotiations of his career. Fiona opened the door. Behind her, at a distance that communicated thoughtfulness, stood Shepherd, arms folded, gray eyes evaluating, and Blythe, who had no distance at all, who was simply present, a small force of nature in a purple sweater with stars on it. "You brought hot chocolate," Blythe said immediately, examining the cups. "With extra whipped cream," Callum said. "I didn't know if that was okay." "That's optimal," Shepherd said, with the particular dignity of a child who has been complimented on his vocabulary, enough to have started deploying it deliberately. "Shepherd," Fiona said, with the quiet warmth of someone managing a moment carefully. "It means the best possible," Shepherd told Callum in case he was unclear. "I know," Callum said. "I learned that word from a guy who was a lot like you, actually. He was very serious and he knew everything about things that interested him." Shepherd considered this. "Who was it?" "Me, when I was your age, a beat." Then Shepherd unfolded his arms, just slightly. They sat around Fiona's kitchen table, which was covered in Shepherd's drawings. Dragons, mostly, and what appeared to be a very detailed cross-section of a submarine. Blythe narrated everything about the hot chocolate experience as it was happening. Shepherd watched Callum the way small scientists watch experiments, carefully, withholding judgment until sufficient data was collected. "What do you do?" Shepherd asked about 15 minutes in. "I run a company. We invest in other businesses, help them grow, like a bank but for companies." "Something like that." Shepherd considered. "Do you like it?" Callum opened his mouth to say yes, automatically, because that was the automatic answer. Then he thought about the hollow hum at the 42nd floor window and said, "I'm good at it. Whether I like it." He paused. "That's a question I'm still figuring out." Shepherd nodded slowly, as though this was a satisfying level of honesty. "I draw," Shepherd said. "I'm going to design buildings someday, or submarines. I haven't decided. Both have good structural challenges," Callum said. Shepherd's expression shifted, just barely, just enough, toward something that might have been approval. After an hour, Fiona moved both children toward their room to get their snow boots for a walk, and Callum stayed at the kitchen table, looking at the drawings spread across it. One caught his eye near the corner. Older paper, slightly crinkled, clearly made a while ago. A family portrait, in crayon, a woman with copper hair, a girl with stars, a tall figure in the corner with dark hair and crossed arms, labeled in careful kid letters, "Dad." He put his hand flat on the drawing and breathed. Fiona appeared in the kitchen doorway. She saw him looking at it. She didn't move for a moment. "He drew that when he was 3, she said. "He asked me what dads looked like. I said different things. He decided on that." Callum looked up at her. "Can I keep it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Ask him," she said finally. "It's his." Shepherd, when asked, took the question extremely seriously, examined the drawing with both hands, and then handed it to Callum with the gravity of someone transferring a deed. "That one's yours," he said. "I'll make a new one, a better one, now that I know what you actually look like." The weeks that followed were the most disorienting of Callum's life, which was saying something for a man who'd negotiated through a financial crisis and watched a market collapse in real time. Fatherhood, it turned out, operated on completely different logic from every other domain he'd mastered. Children didn't respond to competence. They responded to patriotism. They couldn't be managed with strategy or closed with leverage. They needed someone who would sit on the floor and lose at board games and admit when he didn't know the answer to a question about how submarines stayed pressurized underwater. He lost at board games. He admitted a lot of not knowing. He sat on the floor. He started arriving on Tuesday evenings for dinner, which had been Fiona's suggested structure. Predictable, low pressure, easy to cancel if it wasn't working. It worked. By the 3rd week, Blythe had started saving him the chair she considered his. The one with the slightly wobbly leg that nobody else wanted, because it was annoying, which she had apparently decided made it special. Shepherd kept giving him drawings. Not every visit, but regularly. A kind of ongoing document of where they were, the way some people keep journals. They'd started as formal portraits, precise and slightly stiff. By November they'd become something more relaxed, The four of them at the kitchen table, Callum at a park, with Shepard looking at something on the ground, Blythe showing Callum her gymnastics routine with arrows indicating which direction she spun. "He's never drawn like this about anyone before," Fiona said, one evening, after the children were in bed. They were doing the dishes, she washed, he dried. A division of labor that had established itself without discussion. "He's incredible," Callum said, "both of them. But He stopped, trying to find words that weren't embarrassingly emotional. "I know," Fiona said quietly. They worked in silence for a moment. "I've been thinking about the firm," Callum said, "about what I'm doing with it, about whether it's what I want to be doing." He set a glass on the rack. "A company in the portfolio does environmental infrastructure. Sustainable building systems. I've been more interested in that than anything else we hold. I've been wondering what it would look like to shift the firm's focus, put real resources behind it." He paused. "Do more that matters instead of just more that returns." Fiona turned off the water. She dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at him. "What made you start thinking about that?" "Shepard asked me if my work helped anything," Callum said. "I said I thought it helped businesses grow. He asked if the businesses helped people. I said some of them did." He paused. He said, "Which ones?" And I realized, those are the ones I actually care about. The rest of it is just habit. Fiona was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's going to be someone remarkable." "He already is." He looked at her. "They both are. You made them that way. By yourself, for 4 years, you made them that way." Something moved across Fiona's face that she didn't try to contain. She looked away for a moment, at the window above the sink that looked out on the dark street below, and then she looked back at him. "It was hard," she said simply. "I don't say that for credit. I say it because it was true, and because I spent a long time not saying it to anyone." "You could have called me," he said, "even angry, even to ask for money and nothing else you could have." "I know." She leaned against the counter. "I was too angry for a long time. And then I was too. I'd built something by myself and I was afraid that calling you would mean giving some of it away." "That's not logical," she added. "It's completely logical," he said. "You'd learned not to rely on me. I'd taught you that." She looked at him for a long time. "You're different now." "I don't know if I'm different," he said honestly. "I know I understand different things. I'm not sure that's the same." She nodded slowly. "No, but it's a start." The call from his board came in December, 3 months after the park. They wanted to discuss his recent distraction, his reduced hours, his shifting investment priorities, his personal situation, which everyone was too professional to name directly but which everyone knew about, because this was Chicago and these were people who paid to know things. They wanted reassurance about his focus. They wanted to know that Prescott Capital Ventures remained his primary commitment. He drove to the office on a Thursday morning, sat across from the 4 faces he'd built this company with, listened to their concern, which was genuine and self-interested in equal measure, the way all board concern tended to be. Then he thought about Blythe's wobbly chair, about Shepard's drawings, about a woman drying her hands on a dish towel and saying it was hard, simply, without asking for anything in return. "I'm going to be restructuring my role," he said. "I'll be stepping back from daily operations. Marcus Hendren can take over as managing director. He's been ready for 3 years and we both know it." He looked around the table. "I'm not leaving, but I'm going to spend the next phase of this company doing the work I actually believe in, and letting the people I've built and trained run the rest of it." "Callum, this isn't a discussion," he said, not unkindly. "I've already begun the paperwork." He drove from the office to Fiona's building. It was a Wednesday, not a Tuesday, not their established evening. He sat outside for 10 minutes in the cold, watching his own breath, and then he got out and rang the bell. Fiona opened the door. She looked at his face. "What happened?" "I stepped back from the firm." He paused. "I wanted to tell you before you read it somewhere." She studied him. "Come in." Shepard was at his desk in the corner of the living room, working on something architectural. Blueprints, essentially, for something that appeared to be a combination house and submarine. He looked up when Callum came in, clocked the energy in the room and said, "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Callum said. "I made a big decision today. Good big or bad big?" He thought about it honestly. "I think good big. It might be uncomfortable for a while first. Shepard nodded. Mama says the good decisions are usually the ones that feel like standing at the edge of something. Callum looked at Fiona. She's right about that. Blythe appeared from the hallway in pajamas, apparently, having decided that whatever was happening was important enough to rejoin. She evaluated the situation and then walked over to Callum and patted his arm with the confidence of someone dispensing official comfort. "It's okay," she said. "We can watch a movie and have popcorn when things are hard. Mama does that." "That sounds exactly right," Callum said. Later, after the movie and the popcorn and the children asleep and the apartment quiet, Callum and Fiona sat on her couch with the lamp on low and the city outside going about its business below the window. "I owe you something," he said. "Besides the obvious." She looked at him. "The dinner at my mother's. What Patricia Monroe said to you. I need you to know that I went to see Patricia last month. I told her what you told me. I told her what I thought of it." He paused. "And I told my mother everything. Not just that she allowed it, that her approval was the thing that cost me you. Cost our children 4 years of their father. She knows what she did." Fiona was quiet for a moment. "How did that go?" She asked if she could meet Shepard and Blythe someday. He looked at Fiona. "I told her I'd ask. Only if you wanted to. No pressure, no claim." Fiona considered this carefully, the way she considered everything. "Maybe," she said finally, "eventually. When it feels right." "Okay." She looked at him steadily. "I need to ask you something, anything. What do you want? Not for them, for yourself. I need to know what you're actually doing here. In my apartment on a Wednesday night when that wasn't the plan." The question was so direct it almost made him smile, because it was so completely her, the woman who wouldn't let things stay vague when they were important. "I want to be their father," he said. "That's not negotiable, and doesn't depend on anything else." He looked at her. "And I want to try to be someone you trust again. I don't know if that's possible. I know I don't have the right to ask for it. But you asked what I want. And that's the honest answer." The lamp made the room warm. Outside, something was starting to fall. The first real snow of the season, drifting past the window in slow, unhurried flakes. "Shepard's going to be very excited about the snow," Fiona said. "He mentioned he was hoping for a significant accumulation this year." She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind he'd spent 4 years not hearing. "He told me the same thing, in those exact words. He gets it from somewhere." She looked at him sideways. Apparently, the snow came down. The apartment was warm. Somewhere down the hall, Callum's daughter was asleep, dreaming whatever 4-year-olds dream, and his son was probably still working on his submarine blueprints, in the dark, the way serious children do. "Start small," Fiona said finally. "We start small and we're honest about every step. If something's not working, we say so. If I need space, you give it. If the kids need more, you show up for more." She paused. "And if you ever make me feel, even once, like an afterthought." "I know, say it anyway, then you tell me," he said. "And I listen, not to manage it, to actually hear it." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring against every version of him she'd known, and the one sitting here now. "Okay," she said. 2 years and 3 months later, on a Saturday in January, when Chicago had produced the kind of cold that made your face hurt within 30 seconds of being outside, Callum Prescott stood in the community garden that FW Studio had designed for the Humboldt Park neighborhood. The garden was closed for winter, obviously, beds covered in straw, the big oak at the center bare, but there were lights strung around the pergola because Fiona's team was using the space for a winter showcase event, and the lights made the snow in the beds look like something deliberate. Shepard was explaining to his grandmother Eleanor the structural logic of the raised bed system, which he'd apparently memorized from Fiona's design notes. Eleanor Prescott, who had arrived in Humboldt Park in a coat that probably cost what some of these families paid in a year of rent, and who had spent the first 45 minutes of the event listening to Shepard with the particular attention of someone trying very hard to make right a specific kind of wrong, was asking good questions and taking the answers seriously. Blythe had attached herself to Fiona's business partner and was helping hand out pamphlets with the gravity of someone executing a major logistical operation. Callum stood near the pergola with 2 cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching his family in the winter light, and thought about how strange it was that, The life he'd been building for 15 years. The penthouse, the firm, the carefully curated appropriate existence, had felt so complete from the inside and so hollow in the middle. And how the life he'd stumbled into by standing in a park on an October morning and recognizing the posture of a 4-year-old boy felt exactly the opposite. Ramshackle in places, unfinished in others, nothing like what he'd planned, and absolutely full. Fiona came to stand beside him. She took the lukewarm coffee without complaint. "Your mother made Shepard explain the irrigation system twice," she said. He was delighted. "She's trying." "I know." A pause. "I can see it. That matters." Callum looked at her. She was watching Shepard and Eleanor with an expression he knew well by now. The measuring look. The careful assessment. But underneath it, something softer that hadn't always been accessible to him. He'd had to earn his way back toward it, slowly, honestly, in Tuesday dinners and snow days, and a lot of board game defeats. He reached into his coat pocket. He'd been carrying the thing in there for 6 weeks, waiting for the right moment. And he'd started to think, maybe there wasn't a right moment. Maybe there was just the moment you were in, and the choice you made in it. "Fiona." She looked at him. He didn't have a speech. He'd thought about one and discarded it, because speeches were for the person giving them, and this needed to be for her. "I know this isn't perfect timing," he said. "I know we said small steps. I know that technically 6 weeks ago I had a long conversation with Shepard about what he thought about things, and he gave me a very detailed assessment." He paused. He said, and I'm quoting, "that I seemed like someone who was still figuring things out but was trying in the right direction, which he thought was probably enough." Fiona's mouth curved. "I think it's enough too," Callum said. He opened his hand. The ring was simple. He'd asked Fiona's old friend about her taste and gone from there. A warm gold band with a single oval stone, the color of good copper, the color of her hair in October light. "I want to keep figuring things out with you. For a long time, as officially as you'll allow." Fiona looked at the ring, then at him. Then, across the garden at Shepard, who had apparently spotted what was happening from 20 feet away and had gone very still with an expression of 9-year-old emotional intensity that he was trying extremely hard to contain. Blythe had not spotted it yet. She was still moving pamphlets with considerable professional dedication. "You talk to Shepard first," Fiona said. "He's very thoughtful. I wanted his read." "What did he say?" "Exactly." He said, and again I'm quoting, "If you're asking if it's a good idea, yes. If you're asking if she'll say yes, I think so, but she's her own person and you should probably just ask her." Callum paused. Then he went back to his homework. Fiona laughed, the real laugh, the one he'd spent years learning to recognize as the truest thing about her. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." Across the garden, Shepard's restrained expression collapsed into something enormous and uncontained. He said something to Eleanor, who turned, and her face in that moment, a woman who had spent a lifetime managing her expressions and had no management left in her for this, was simply open. Blythe finally looked up from her pamphlets. "Mom," she announced, at a volume impressive for a 6-year-old in a winter garden. "Are you getting married?" "Yes," Fiona called back. Blythe considered this for approximately 1 second. "Can I be in charge of the decorations?" "Absolutely," Callum said. She immediately returned to her pamphlets, satisfied, already planning. Shepard walked across the garden to them with the dignity of someone who had known this was coming and was choosing graciousness about it. He stood in front of Callum and held out his hand, formally, the way he'd seen people do it. Callum shook it. "Good," Shepard said. "Now you live with us. You can finally have the wobbly chair properly instead of just visiting it." They walked home through the January cold, the 4 of them, past the lights and the snow-covered beds, and Blythe's running commentary on decoration concepts, past Eleanor's car which she'd parked 2 blocks away, and which she now walked toward with something lighter in her step than she'd arrived with, past the city that had held all of this. The park where Callum had stopped walking, the coffee shop where Fiona had let him sit across from her, the apartment above the kitchen that smelled like something baking, the years of showing up on Tuesdays and then Wednesdays, and then every day that needed him. Shepard reached up and put his hand in Callum's without any announcement. Just took it. The way you take what belongs to you when you've been patient long enough. And Callum held on. The way you hold something you nearly lost and found again and intend to keep.